I want to tell you about a rule so simple, it almost sounds like a joke. No spreadsheets, no budgeting apps, no tracking categories, just one number, $5. And the way this single rule quietly changed my relationship with spending over about 3 months is something I genuinely didn't see coming. But before I explain the rule, I need to explain the problem it fixed, because the problem wasn't what I thought it was. For a long time, I assumed my spending problem was about big purchases, the occasional expensive thing I bought without enough thought, the impulse buy that felt regrettable a week later. I figured if I could just control those moments, everything else would sort itself out. But when I actually looked at my spending, really looked at it, the big purchases weren't the issue. The issue was the small ones. The constant, low-friction, barely noticed small ones. The $4 coffee, the $7 app upgrade, the $9 snack at the petrol station, the $6 add-on at checkout. Individually invisible, collectively devastating. And the frustrating part was that no budgeting system I tried actually addressed this category effectively, because the small purchases happened too fast, too automatically, and too frequently for any system requiring deliberate tracking to catch them in time. My name's Jordan. If your spending problem lives in the small stuff rather than the big stuff, hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. All right, here's the rule. Any unplanned purchase under $5, I buy without guilt, no questions asked. Any unplanned purchase over $5, I wait until tomorrow. That's it. The entire rule. One threshold, one delay. Nothing else. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds too simple to actually work. And honestly, I thought the same thing when I first started. Because the obvious objection is, if I really want something, I'll just buy it tomorrow anyway. Which is true. Sometimes I did. But here's what I didn't expect. The 24-hour delay doesn't work by making you forget what you wanted. It works by changing which version of you makes the decision. The you that sees something and wants it immediately is an emotional you, reactive, driven by the dopamine hit of acquisition, the excitement of novelty, the satisfaction of acting on a desire right now. That version of you is a genuinely terrible financial decision maker, not because it's stupid, but because it's optimized for feeling good in the moment, not for your actual priorities. The you that evaluates the same purchase 24 hours later is a different person entirely. Calmer, less emotionally activated, more connected to actual preferences rather than momentary impulses. And that version of you almost always makes better decisions. The $5 threshold exists because not every purchase needs that delay. Truly small amounts, a coffee, a snack, something genuinely negligible, don't warrant a 24-hour deliberation process. Building friction around every tiny transaction would make the system exhausting and unsustainable. So anything under $5 stays frictionless, and anything over $5 gets the pause. Here's what the data actually looked like after 3 months of following this rule. I tracked every instance where I invoked the $5 rule, meaning every time I wanted to buy something over $5 that wasn't planned. Over 3 months, that happened 67 times. Of those 67 instances, 31 resulted in a purchase the following day. 36 did not. That means 54% of the time, the thing I wanted badly enough to think about buying simply lost its appeal within 24 hours. Let me put a number on that. My average unplanned purchase in that category was around $23. 36 abandoned purchases at $23 average equals $828 over 3 months, or $3,312 annualized, from one rule, applied automatically, without a single budget category or tracking app. But here's the part that surprised me most. It wasn't the money. The money was great. But the bigger change was psychological. Because after about 6 weeks of following the rule, something shifted in how I experienced wanting things. The urgency started to fade faster. The emotional charge around seeing something and wanting it immediately became noticeably weaker. Not gone, but smaller, like a muscle that stops pulling as hard when you stop feeding it. Research in behavioral psychology supports exactly this. The more you interrupt an automatic response pattern, the weaker that pattern becomes over time. Every time you invoke the $5 rule, you're not just saving money on that specific purchase. You're gradually rewiring the automatic response itself, making the impulse slightly less automatic, slightly less powerful, slightly less in control. And that compounding effect of a weakening impulse response over weeks and months is worth far more than any individual purchase avoided. Now, there are two objections I hear most often about this rule. The first is that it's too rigid. What about flash sales? What about limited time offers? Here's my honest answer. Flash sales and limited time offers are specifically designed to override your rational decision-making by manufacturing urgency. The entire point of a countdown timer is to prevent you from invoking exactly the kind of delay the $5 rule creates, which means that resistance, the discomfort of not acting on the urgency, is the rule working exactly as intended. The second objection is that $5 feels arbitrary. Why not 10 or 20?
The threshold is personal. $5 works for most situations because it's high enough to include the majority of small impulse purchases and low enough to stay genuinely frictionless on truly minor spending. But you can adjust it. Some people use $10, some use $20. The number matters less than the consistency. What doesn't work is making the threshold so high that most impulse purchases slip under it. The rule needs to catch the majority of your unplanned spending, not just the occasional big ones. Start with $5. Adjust after a month if needed, but start simple, because simple is what actually gets followed. If this helped, hit subscribe. And I want to know, what's your current threshold for thinking twice before buying something? Drop it in the comments.